Well, last week we talked about the first unique quality and looked at some evidence for God, the soul, and Jesus from science and from philosophy and reason. This week I'm going to talk about that second quality, namely that Christian hope is grounded in the unconditional love of God.
And a ransom captive Israel.
No other religion has ever nearly proclaimed God to be unconditional love, though of course in Judaism and other religions we see that love is a quality of God, but the unconditional, unrestricted love of God, that's Jesus. And he tries to illustrate this in three ways, which we ought to reflect about during this Advent season as we anticipate his coming into the world. The first thing he says is that his Father's name is Abba. It is Daddy. It's an affectionate and caring and compassionate and loving Father. You remember, in Semitic culture, a name represents the essence of the person or the essence of the being. And it's that daddy, that dad, that papa that's laden with trust and affection, laden with caring and compassion. That's who he says is his Father. And that's how we ought to address his Father. The second thing that Jesus does to illustrate the unconditional love of God is he says, my Father is like the father of the prodigal son. Now listen to this story. And then he tells a story about a son who is as bad as any son could be in first century Jewish culture. So this son betrays his family and says, Dad, you're as good as dead to me. Just give me my share of the inheritance and I'm out of here. Then he goes to a foreign land and betrays his own people and his election. Then he spends all of the money in the foreign land on dissolute living, violating Torah and violating the law of God and even violating God himself, and then winds up living with the pigs, a very unclean animal in first century Judaism. He couldn't be any worse, even in the midst of profound sinfulness that anyone in justice would say would deserve to have you thrown out of the family 100%, instead of rejecting him and lecturing him and telling him to get off the property. The father runs out to greet him. The father throws his arms around him and kisses him and then kills the fatted calf. That's who your God is. Then Jesus goes on to illustrate it further. He's going to make a self-sacrifice, a complete gift of self on the cross. Now remember what Jesus' definition of love is in the Christian scriptures. What is it? There is no greater love than a man can have than to give his life, his whole self for his friends. So what's Jesus doing in the crucifixion? He's not only saying, I'm unconditional love, he's proving and guaranteeing his unconditional love by dying for us. And this is the ground of our hope. This is why we can be so sure. Not because we did everything right. The Lord knows I certainly don't do everything right. But because he loves us unconditionally and unrestrictedly, a unique dimension to Christian hope, grounded in the very love and self-sacrifice and life of Jesus Christ, who came to be with us, who we are celebrating in this Advent season and will bring to fruition in the Christmas that we are about to celebrate in 2 weeks. I'm your host, Father Robert Spitzer.